Welcome to Cafe Stories, where every story is a new mystery waiting to be solved. Grab a coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Hercule Poirot and the Mystery of the Conductor's Baton. Chapter 1. Death at the Symphony. I had been in London for just over a fortnight when Poirot suggested we attend the symphony. My old friend had, in recent months, developed what he termed an appreciation for the finer harmonies, though I suspected his interest had more to do with the London Symphony's new conductor than any sudden passion for Beethoven. "Mon ami," Poirot said as we settled into our excellent seats, third-row centre, procured through some connection I didn't inquire about. "Tonight we shall witness the great Maestro Vincelli. They say his Fifth Symphony is without equal in all of Europe." "I thought it was Beethoven's symphony," I remarked, adjusting my program. Poirot's moustache twitched in that particular way that indicated I had said something that amused him. "The composition, yes, it is Beethoven's, but the interpretation, the soul of the performance, that belongs to the conductor. And Vincelli, he possesses what the English call the iron fist in the velvet glove." The murmur of the crowd diminished as the orchestra members took their places. I observed the first violinist, a striking woman with severe features, softened only slightly by her formal black attire, arrange her music with precise movements. Poirot followed my gaze. "Madame Elena Rossi," he murmured. "They say she once had aspirations beyond the orchestra pit." Before I could inquire further, the audience erupted in applause as a tall, imperious figure strode onto the stage. Maestro Antonio Vincelli acknowledged the reception with the merest inclination of his silver-haired head, his expression suggesting he found the adulation both expected and somewhat tedious. "He carries himself like a general reviewing troops," I whispered to Poirot. "Or perhaps a king addressing subjects he finds wanting." Poirot replied softly. "Observe, Hastings, how not one of the musicians meets his eye directly. There is fear there, and something else. Resentment, perhaps." The light dimmed. Behind Vincelli, a younger man with keen features handed him a slender baton with ceremonial deference. Vincelli accepted it without acknowledgement, and the assistant, whom my program identified as Richard Bennett, associate conductor, retreated to the wings. The first notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony filled Royal Albert Hall. Even to my untrained ear, there was something magnificent in the way Vincelli commanded the orchestra. Each movement of his baton seemed to physically draw the music from the instruments, as though he were pulling invisible strings. "He is masterful, is he not?" Poirot murmured, his eyes fixed on the conductor. I nodded, noticing a distinguished gentleman in the front row watching the performance with unusual intensity. He sat forward in his seat, his gaze never leaving Vincelli's hands. "Do you know who that is?" I asked. "Dr. Julian Mercer," said Poirot, "the orchestra's physician. A sensible precaution, given the, passionate nature of artistic temperaments." The first movement concluded to enthusiastic applause. As the second began, I noticed a well-dressed woman in a box seat to our right watching Vincelli through opera glasses with particular attention. She barely seemed to blink. "Lady Margaret Harrington," Poirot explained, following my gaze again with that uncanny perception of his. "A generous patroness of the arts. They say her generosity extends beyond financial support, where Vincelli is concerned, though he does not reciprocate her enthusiasm." The symphony progressed, and I found myself drawn into the powerful crescendos and delicate passages that flowed from the stage. Vincelli's conducting became more animated as the music built toward what I assumed was the climax of the third movement. His gestures grew broader, more demanding, his small frame somehow expanding to fill the stage. It was during a particularly dramatic flourish that it happened. Vincelli raised the baton high, his face contorted with the emotion of the piece, then brought it down in a sweeping arc and suddenly froze. The baton remained clutched in his hand, but something had changed in his stance. The orchestra continued for several bars before the musicians closest to him sensed something amiss. One by one, instruments faltered and fell silent, though some in the rear continued playing, unaware of the unfolding drama. Vincelli's body swayed slightly, his free hand moving to his chest in a curious fluttering motion. The baton slipped from his fingers, clattering to the stage with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the now silent hall. Then, with a terrible grace, Maestro Antonio Vincelli collapsed. For a moment, a bizarre, suspended moment, no one moved. Perhaps, like myself, they believed this to be some theatrical element of the performance. It was Poirot who broke the spell, rising to his feet with unusual haste. "A doctor? Is there a doctor present?" he called, though his eyes were fixed not on the fallen conductor, but on the baton that lay beside him. From the front row, Dr. Mercer was already vaulting onto the stage, with remarkable agility for a man of his years. The audience erupted in confused murmurs as he knelt beside Vincelli, loosening the conductor's collar and feeling for a pulse. "Call an ambulance," Dr. Mercer shouted, beginning chest compressions with practiced efficiency. Backstage, a woman's voice cried out, a sharp sound of distress that cut through the growing commotion. A young woman with Vincelli's distinctive profile pushed past the gathering musicians, falling to her knees opposite Dr. Mercer. "Father," she cried, reaching for Vincelli's hand. "Mademoiselle, please," Dr. Mercer said firmly, "give me room to work." Poirot was already making his way toward the stage, and I followed close behind. As we reached the steps at the side, a harried-looking man in evening clothes intercepted us. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but you can't—" "Charles Whitcomb." Poirot addressed him by name, though I was certain they had never met. "I am Hercule Poirot. It would be most helpful if you would clear the hall of spectators while preserving the scene, n'est-ce pas?" The orchestra manager blinked in surprise, then nodded. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you." As Whitcomb moved to address the increasingly restive audience, Poirot stepped onto the stage with the natural authority that always amazed me. He approached the fallen conductor but made no move to interfere with Dr. Mercer's efforts. Instead, he bent down and with a quick movement that I doubt anyone else noticed, retrieved the fallen baton, slipping it into his pocket. "Poirot," I whispered aloud, "what are you doing?" "Ensuring that evidence is preserved, mon ami," he replied quietly. This was no natural death. Observe the blue tinge to his lips, the fixed pupils, and most telling, the way he gripped the baton at the last, not as a conductor but as a man in sudden, terrible pain. I looked again at Vincelli. The maestro's face in death had lost its imperious cast, and now seemed merely old and somewhat bewildered. Dr. Mercer sat back on his heels, shaking his head. "He's gone," he announced, closing Vincelli's staring eyes with gentle fingers. "I suspect a massive coronary event." "Perhaps," said Poirot, in a tone that suggested he thought nothing of the kind. A commotion at the stage door heralded the arrival of Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. His familiar, somewhat bulldog-like features set in an expression of harried efficiency. "Poirot," he exclaimed, spotting my friend immediately. "I might have known you'd be mixed up in this." "Good evening, Chief Inspector," Poirot replied calmly. "It seems our paths cross yet again over a matter most unfortunate." Japp's gaze moved to the body of the conductor, then back to Poirot. "Natural causes, is it? Heart attack during the excitement." "That," said Poirot, patting his pocket where the baton lay hidden, "is what we must determine. But I would suggest, my friend, that the concert hall be sealed." and all present be questioned before departing. This may be a performance none of us was expecting to attend. The perfect murder in plain sight. As Japp began issuing orders to the constables who had accompanied him, I saw Richard Bennet watching from the wings, his face a mask of professional concern. But there was something else in his expression, a calculation perhaps, that made me wonder. Poirot, following my gaze, nodded slightly. "Observe everyone, Hastings," he murmured. "The killer still stands among us, and the performance, I fear, is far from over." Chapter 2. Initial Investigation. Inspector Japp moved with practiced efficiency, ordering the constables to secure the exits of Royal Albert Hall, while instructing the flustered ushers to guide the audience back to their seats. The murmurs of confusion swelled around us like an impromptu and discordant symphony. "Ladies and gentlemen," Japp announced, his voice carrying through the hall, "I must ask for your patience. There has been an unfortunate incident, and we shall need to take some brief statements before anyone departs." From my position near the stage, I observed the reactions of those closest to where Maestro Vincelli had fallen. The orchestra members remained in their seats, instruments forgotten in their laps, exchanging whispers and glances of bewilderment. Richard Bennet had emerged fully from the wings and now stood with a curious stillness, his gaze fixed on the spot where Vincelli's body had lain before it was discreetly covered and removed to an antechamber. Poirot, meanwhile, had drawn Inspector Japp aside. I joined them in time to hear my friend speaking in that precise manner he adopted when imparting critical information. "Chief Inspector, I insist that particular attention be paid to the maestro's baton," Poirot said, producing the slender object from his pocket. "You observe the craftsmanship? And this is not a common implement." Japp took the baton with a frown. "Seems ordinary enough to me, Poirot. Fine wood, certainly, but look more closely at the grip." Poirot insisted, his index finger indicating the area where Vincelli's hand would have clasped the baton. "You see the almost imperceptible discoloration, and here," he pointed to a minuscule irregularity in the polished surface, "is what I believe to be a mechanism of most ingenious design." Japp squinted, bringing the baton closer to his face. "I'll be blowed, there is something there, like a tiny pinprick." "Precisely," said Poirot. "I suggest this baton be secured immediately and examined by your forensic experts with the utmost care. It may well be our murder weapon." "Murder weapon?" I exclaimed, perhaps too loudly, earning a reproving glance from Poirot. "Discretion, Hastings," he murmured. "But yes, I believe Maestro Vincelli was murdered most deliberately, and with exquisite timing." Japp nodded grimly, wrapping the baton carefully in his handkerchief. "I'll have it sent to the laboratory straight away. In the meantime, let's begin questioning the key figures." He glanced toward the stage, starting with those closest to the victim during his final moments. Poirot's eyes gleamed with that particular light I had come to recognize as his detecting faculties, engaging fully. "An excellent suggestion. Perhaps we might use the conductor's private room for these interviews. It would afford us privacy and possibly additional insights." Backstage was a warren of narrow corridors and small rooms. We were led to Vincelli's private chamber by a nervous young constable who had clearly never before set foot in such rarefied artistic surroundings. The room itself was appointed with understated elegance, a comfortable settee, a writing desk with precisely arranged score sheets and a full-length mirror. Most notable was a glass-fronted cabinet mounted on the wall, its velvet interior designed to hold what I presumed were Vincelli's collection of batons. "The case appears intact," observed Poirot, examining the cabinet without touching it. "No sign of forced entry, and yet—" He paused, his head tilting slightly in that characteristic pose of his when something captured his attention. Curious, the spacing suggests an item is missing. Charles Whitcomb, the orchestra manager, was our first interviewee. A tall man with thinning hair and the perpetually harried expression of someone juggling too many responsibilities, he entered the room with obvious reluctance. "A terrible business, gentlemen," he said, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief despite the room being quite cool. Maestro Vincelli was a towering figure in the musical world, irreplaceable, quite irreplaceable. "And yet," Poirot remarked mildly, "I understand you will need to replace him rather quickly. The season is underway, is it not?" Whitcomb's eyes darted to Poirot, then away. "Yes, well, Richard Bennett will step in temporarily. He's been Vincelli's understudy for nearly 2 years, capable enough, though lacking the maestro's unique interpretation." "This cabinet," Poirot indicated the glass case, "it holds Vincelli's batons?" "Yes," Whitcomb confirmed. "He was most particular about them. Had them specially crafted by an artisan in Vienna, who'd use nothing else." "And who had access to this cabinet?" Whitcomb shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, Vincelli himself, of course. And I have a master key to all rooms, as does Mrs. Abernathy, our wardrobe mistress, though I can't imagine she would have any reason to enter the maestro's private room." "The cabinet itself appears to be locked," Japp observed. "Vincelli kept the key on his person at all times," Whitcomb replied. "He was particular about his possessions." "One might say paranoid," I suggested. Whitcomb's lips thinned. "One might say justified in his caution. Maestro Vincelli had many admirers who would not hesitate to claim a souvenir, and some detractors who might—" He trailed off, seeming to realize the implication of his words. "Who might what, Mr. Whitcomb?" Japp prompted. "Who might wish to sabotage him in some small way," Whitcomb finished lamely. "The musical world is more competitive than outsiders realize." "I understand Vincelli was not universally beloved within the orchestra," Poirot remarked, his tone conversational. At this, Whitcomb gave a short, humorless laugh. "An understatement, Monsieur Poirot. Vincelli was brilliant, a genius even, but he was also ruthless. Just last week he dismissed 3 musicians, veterans with decades of experience, because they failed to meet his exacting standards during rehearsal. Called them musical incompetence in front of everyone. It was—" He shook his head, "unnecessarily cruel." "And yet you defended his decision?" Poirot inquired. "My position required it," Whitcomb replied stiffly. "The London Symphony must maintain the highest standards." "Even at the cost of human dignity?" I asked, unable to contain myself. Whitcomb merely shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about the compromises his position entailed. After Whitcomb was dismissed, Dr. Mercer joined us, still in his evening clothes but now with the sleeves rolled up. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a medical professional accustomed to emergencies. "I've completed my preliminary examination," he informed us without preamble. "At first glance it appears to be cardiac arrest, but there are certain anomalies that trouble me." "Such as?" Japp inquired. "The rapidity of onset, for one. Vincelli displayed no signs of distress until the very moment of collapse. And there's a curious puncture mark on his right palm, minute, easily overlooked, but definitely present." Poirot nodded as though this confirmed a theory already forming in his mind. Would this be consistent with a toxic substance delivered via a sharp projection on the baton? Dr. Mercer's eyebrows rose. "Absolutely. A fast-acting neurotoxin introduced directly into the bloodstream would produce exactly the symptoms Vincelli exhibited, but such a method would require considerable knowledge, both medical and technical." "And opportunity," added Poirot. "Tell me, Doctor, from your position in the front row, did you observe anything unusual before the maestro's collapse?" Something flickered across Dr. Mercer's face, so quickly I might have imagined it. Nothing beyond Vincelli's usual intensity. He was particularly animated during that performance. "You attend all performances, Keat?" I asked. "Most," Mercer replied. "It's part of my role as orchestra physician. The physical demands on musicians are considerable, particularly during extended performances." "And your relation to Vincelli was purely professional?" Poirot inquired. Dr. Mercer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Purely professional," he confirmed. After the doctor departed, we interviewed Elena Rossi, the first violinist. She entered with a regal bearing that seemed at odds with her position in the orchestra, her dark eyes assessing each of us in turn. "Madame Rossi," Poirot began, "my condolences on the loss of your conductor." "Thank you," she replied, her English perfect but tinged with an Italian accent, though I suspect many will mourn the maestro's genius more sincerely than his person. "You were not fond of him?" Jap asked bluntly. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Fond? No, Inspector. Vincelli did not inspire fondness, respect, fear, admiration, envy. These were his currency. Fondness he considered beneath his station." "I understand you knew him in Italy before your time with the London Symphony," Poirot said. Madame Rossi's expression cooled. "Ancient history, Monsieur Poirot. We were colleagues in Milan, briefly." "More than colleagues, perhaps," Poirot suggested delicately. Her eyes flashed. "Is my personal history relevant to his death from heart failure?" "If it were merely heart failure, perhaps not," Poirot conceded. "But when murder is suspected, all connections become significant." The word murder hung in the air like a discordant note. Madame Rossi's composure slipped for just an instant before she recovered. "Murder," she repeated softly. "I see. Then yes, Vincelli and I were involved many years ago. A mistake I paid for dearly when I ended the relationship. He saw to it that my hopes for a solo career were thoroughly crushed." She straightened her shoulders. "But that was 20 years ago. I have made my peace with my place in the orchestra." As she rose to leave, Poirot posed one final question. "The baton Vincelli used tonight, was it his usual one?" Madame Rossi paused at the door. "I couldn't say with certainty. He had several that appeared identical to my eye. But Vincelli himself would have known immediately if someone had substituted a different one. His sensitivity to such details was extraordinary." After she departed, Poirot turned to us, his expression thoughtful. "Our victim," he said, "becomes more interesting with each conversation. A man of genius who cultivated enmity as assiduously as he cultivated his art. The list of those with motive grows, but the method restricts our field considerably." "How so?" I asked. "The murder weapon is elegant, Hastings, precise. It required technical skill, intimate knowledge of Vincelli's habits, and perfect timing. Our killer is no opportunist but an artist in their own right." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And like all artists, they have left their signature on their work. We need only learn to read it correctly." Chapter 3. The Complicated Maestro. Our interviews continued well into the evening. The grand hall had emptied of its audience, leaving behind an eerie silence, punctuated only by the occasional footsteps of constables securing evidence. Poirot insisted on maintaining the sequence of interviews without pause, his energy seemingly inexhaustible despite the late hour. "The impressions are freshest now, mon ami," he explained, when I suggested a break. "And in matters of murder, time is the greatest enemy of truth." Richard Bennett was next to enter Vincelli's private room. The assistant conductor had changed from his performance attire into a more casual jacket, though he remained impeccably groomed. He carried himself with the confident posture of a man accustomed to command, yet there was something deferential in his manner as he greeted Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you," Bennet said, extending his hand, "though I confess I'm puzzled by your involvement. Surely Maestro Vincelli's tragic heart attack doesn't warrant the attention of Europe's greatest detective." "The circumstances of death often reveal themselves only gradually, Monsieur Bennet," Poirot replied, his expression giving nothing away. "I am merely assisting Inspector Japp in ensuring all proper procedures are followed." Bennet nodded, though I noticed his gaze drift momentarily to the glass cabinet with its missing baton. "You were Vincelli's assistant for how long?" Japp inquired, notebook in hand. "Nearly 2 years," Bennet replied. "Though assistant is perhaps misleading. Associate conductor is my official title. I conduct certain performances when Maestro Vincelli is indisposed or engaged elsewhere, and I lead sectional rehearsals." "And the relationship between you was—" Poirot left the question deliberately open-ended. Bennet's smile was tight. "Professional." Vincelli was not one for personal relationships within the orchestra. He believed familiarity bred mediocrity. "Yet you handed him his baton tonight," I observed. "That seems a rather personal service from an associate conductor." "A tradition, Captain Hastings, nothing more," Bennet explained. "The ceremonial presentation of the baton is customary in many orchestras. It signifies the transfer of authority from the institution to the conductor." "And the baton you presented tonight," Poirot interjected. "Was it selected by you or by Maestro Vincelli himself?" A flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossed Bennet's face. "By Vincelli, of course. He kept his batons locked in that cabinet and selected one before each performance based on, well, criteria known only to himself. Different pieces apparently required different batons, though I never discerned any pattern to his choices." "You had no access to this cabinet?" Japp asked. "None," Bennet confirmed firmly. "Vincelli guarded his batons jealously. They were crafted specially for him by an artisan in Vienna, perfectly balanced for his grip and conducting style." "I understand you are now the interim conductor," Poirot remarked casually. "By default, yes," Bennet acknowledged, "until the board appoints a permanent replacement." "A position you yourself might covet," Japp suggested bluntly. Bennet's expression hardened slightly. "Every conductor aspires to lead a prestigious orchestra, Inspector. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. But I had hoped to earn such a position through merit, not tragic circumstance." After Bennet departed, Poirot paced the small room, his hands clasped behind his back, his lips moving silently as though carrying on a conversation with himself. It was a habit I had observed many times when his little grey cells were particularly active. "What do you make of him?" I asked. "A man of ambition, certainly," Poirot replied. "But whether that ambition extends to murder—" He shrugged eloquently. "Let us reserve judgment until we have spoken with all our suspects." Lady Margaret Harrington arrived with the imperious air of one unaccustomed to waiting. Despite the late hour, she was immaculately dressed, her jewelry subtle but unmistakably valuable. She carried herself with the confidence of wealth and position, yet I detected a certain fragility beneath her composed exterior. "I really don't see why I should be detained like a common criminal," she announced as she entered. "Maestro Vincelli was a dear friend. This has been a most distressing evening." "We apologize for the inconvenience, Lady Harrington," Poirot said, his manner instantly more deferential. "Your insights may prove invaluable, particularly given your close association with the orchestra." "I am merely a patroness," she demurred, though her expression softened at Poirot's flattery. "The arts must be supported, especially in these difficult times. Your generosity is well known, Poirot agreed. I understand you recently presented Maestro Vincelli with a gift, an antique baton. Lady Harrington's perfectly manicured hand went to the strand of pearls at her throat. Yes, a small token of appreciation. It once belonged to Gustav Mahler, a collector's piece I thought Antonio would appreciate. And did he? Japp inquired. A shadow passed across her features. He accepted it, though not with the enthusiasm I had hoped for. Antonio could be difficult in matters of gratitude. There was a public disagreement between you recently, I believe, Poirot asked delicately. Lady Harrington's cheeks coloured slightly. A minor artistic difference, nothing more. I suggested the orchestra might include more Elgar in their repertoire, for patriotic sentiment, you understand. Antonio felt such considerations had no place in programming decisions. And did you threaten to withdraw your financial support? Japp pressed. Her eyes flashed. Certainly not. Well, perhaps I intimated that my patronage might be directed to more appreciative cultural institutions, but that was merely the heat of the moment. Antonio and I had a complex relationship, but I valued his genius above all. This antique baton, Poirot continued, might we see it? Perhaps it was the one Maestro Vincelli chose for tonight's performance. I doubt that very much, Lady Harrington replied. Antonio called it charming but impractical, and said he would keep it as a display piece only. He was quite particular about his performing instruments. After Lady Harrington's departure, our final interview of the evening was with Sophia Vincelli. The conductor's daughter entered with visible reluctance, her resemblance to her father unmistakable in her sharp features and intense gaze. She appeared exhausted, grief etching lines around her eyes that made her look older than her 35 years. Mademoiselle Vincelli, Poirot began gently. Please accept my condolences on your loss. Thank you, she replied, her voice steadied despite her obvious fatigue. Though I suspect you're less interested in my grief than in my alibi, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Your directness is appreciated. I understand your relationship with your father was complex. A bitter smile crossed her face. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. My father abandoned my mother and me when I was 12 years old. He considered family a distraction from his art. We reconnected only recently after my mother's death last year. Yet, you were seen arguing with him before tonight's performance, Japp noted. Sophia's gaze was unflinching. Yes, he had refused to fulfill the financial promises he made to my mother years ago, promises that would have made her final years more comfortable. She paused, collecting herself. It was about money, Inspector, not murder. You are a chemical engineer, I believe, Poirot inquired. I am, she confirmed. I specialize in industrial applications of organic compounds. An expertise that would include knowledge of various toxins, I suggested. Her eyes narrowed. Are you implying my father was poisoned, and that I had something to do with it? We are merely establishing facts, mademoiselle, Poirot said soothingly. Your father's baton appears to have been modified to deliver a toxic substance. Such modification would require both technical skill and access to certain chemicals, along with opportunity and motive, Sophia added flatly. Yes, I understand how it looks, Monsieur Poirot. I have the knowledge, the apparent motive, and I was backstage before the performance. She leaned forward slightly. But if I had wanted to kill my father, I would hardly have chosen such a public and theatrical method. I am a scientist, not a dramatist. When our interviews concluded and Sophia had departed, Poirot stood before the glass cabinet, studying the empty space where a baton should have been. Our victim grows more complex with each conversation, does he not, Hastings? He murmured. A man of undeniable genius who cultivated animosity as diligently as he cultivated his art. The murderer required three things: technical ability, access, and intimate knowledge of Vincelli's habits. Our field of suspects is not narrowing, but expanding. What's our next step? Japp asked, stifling a yawn. We must examine the full orchestra, Poirot declared. Tomorrow, I wish to observe a rehearsal under Monsieur Bennet's direction. The dynamics of the orchestra may reveal much that remains hidden, and his eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. I would very much like to locate the missing baton from this cabinet, for I suspect, mes amis, that when we find it, we shall be much closer to our killer. Chapter 4. Family Disharmony. The following morning found us at Vincelli's London apartment, a spacious flat in Mayfair that reflected its owner's austere tastes and singular focus. Unlike the cluttered homes of collectors or the comfortable arrangements of domestic life, Vincelli's residence was a temple to music alone. The sitting room contained little furniture, save for a grand piano and a single armchair positioned before a music stand. The walls were lined with shelves of scores and recordings, meticulously arranged by composer, hand date. Observe, Hastings, Poirot murmured, as we waited for Inspector Japp to join us. No photographs, no mementos. The absence speaks as loudly as any presence might. Not a man who valued personal connections, I agreed, taking in the sterile perfection of the room. And yet, Poirot continued, his finger tracing the spines of leather-bound musical scores, a man of passion, but passion directed entirely toward his art. One might say he did not live with music. He'd lived for it alone. The door opened to admit Japp, accompanied by Sophia Vincelli. The maestro's daughter looked even more worn than she had the previous evening, her face pale beneath her dark hair. She nodded curtly to Poirot and myself. The building manager let us in, she explained, her voice flat. I'm apparently listed as my father's next of kin, despite our estrangement. Most considerate of you to accompany us, mademoiselle, Poirot said. A daughter's insight may prove invaluable. A bitter smile touched her lips. Hardly. I've been in this apartment exactly twice before today, both in the last month. My father was not one for family visits. Yet you sought to reconnect with him recently, I asked. Sophia moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface without pressing the keys. After my mother died last year, I found myself adrift. Despite everything, he was my only remaining family. I thought perhaps we might. She shook her head. It was foolish sentimentality. He rebuffed your attempts at reconciliation? Poirot inquired gently. Not entirely. He agreed to meet occasionally, though always on his terms. Our conversations inevitably turned to what he called practical matters, primarily my mother's estate. Japp, who had been examining a desk in the corner, looked up sharply. Estate? I understood your mother died with limited means. She did, Sophia confirmed, but she maintained until her death that my father had promised her financial support that never materialized. She believed he had set aside funds in a trust. Her expression hardened. He claimed no such arrangement existed, that my mother had fabricated these promises to save face. Your disagreement before the concert concerned these matters? Poirot asked. Sophia nodded. I had discovered some old letters suggesting there might indeed have been a formal arrangement. I confronted him with them, but he dismissed me, said the past was irrelevant, and that my mother had always been prone to convenient fictions. Her voice caught slightly. It was our final conversation. As Sophia moved about the apartment, pointing out the few areas she was familiar with, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small study adjacent to the main room. Unlike the austere sitting room, this space showed signs of regular use. Papers on the desk, a half-empty cup of what appeared to be cold coffee, and, most significantly, a small open case lined with velvet. "The Baton case," Poirot murmured, examining it without touching. "Empty, you observe." "Should it not be?" I asked. According to Mr. Whitcomb, Vincelli kept a collection of specially crafted batons. This case appears designed to hold one, yet it is empty, and the cabinet at Royal Albert Hall showed a missing baton as well. His eyes gleamed. Our maestro was meticulous about his instruments, Hastings. Such absences are most suggestive. While Japp questioned Sophia further about her father's acquaintances and habits, Poirot continued his methodical examination of the study. He paid particular attention to the desk where scattered papers revealed correspondence in multiple languages. Vincelli maintained an extensive international network, he observed, invitations to conduct in Vienna, Berlin, New York. A man at the peak of his profession. "Which makes his murder all the more baffling," I replied. "If professional jealousy was the motive, surely there were more direct rivals than those in his own orchestra." "Ah, but proximity provides opportunity, mon ami, and in matters of passion, be it love, hatred, or revenge, proximity can be the decisive factor." Poirot carefully shifted a stack of papers, revealing an envelope with a Viennese postmark. His expression sharpened as he examined the contents. "Most interesting," he murmured, returning the letter to its place with meticulous care. Our exploration was interrupted by a telephone call from Royal Albert Hall. After a brief conversation, Japp turned to us with a grim expression. "The laboratory results are in," he announced. Vincelli was indeed poisoned, a synthetic neurotoxin delivered through a puncture wound in his palm. The baton contained a spring-loaded mechanism that could be triggered by applying pressure at a specific point. He glanced at his notebook. "The report states that such a device would require significant engineering knowledge to construct, and knowledge of chemistry to select the appropriate toxin," Poirot added. "Our murderer is both technically skilled and scientifically informed." Sophia, who had been standing in the doorway, visibly paled. "You're suggesting I'm responsible because of my engineering background?" "We are exploring all possibilities, mademoiselle," Poirot replied diplomatically. "Then explore this," she said with sudden intensity. "My father made enemies everywhere he went. His pursuit of perfection was relentless and cruel. Ask about Vienna, Monsieur Poirot. Ask about what happened there 5 years ago." "What happened in Vienna?" Japp demanded. Sophia's laugh was hollow. "I don't know the details, only that a promising young musician challenged my father's interpretation during a rehearsal. He was publicly humiliated, his career destroyed. There were rumors." She trailed off. "What sort of rumors?" I pressed. "That the young man took his own life shortly afterward. That my father was unmoved, calling it natural selection in the artistic sphere." She shook her head. "My father's dedication to music exceeded his humanity, Inspector. Perhaps that is motive enough." As we prepared to leave the apartment, Poirot paused once more before the empty baton case, his expression thoughtful. "The missing baton," he mused. "2 empty spaces where there should be instruments. The original and the replacement, perhaps. We must locate them both, mes amis. For I suspect that in these absences lies the key to our mystery." Chapter 5. Patronage and Passion. That afternoon found us once again at Royal Albert Hall, where Richard Bennett had scheduled an emergency rehearsal with the orchestra. The vast auditorium felt oddly intimate, with rows of empty seats facing the stage, where musicians were arranging their music stands and tuning their instruments. The atmosphere was subdued, yet charged with an undercurrent of tension that seemed to vibrate alongside the strings being tested. Poirot, Jap and I positioned ourselves discreetly in the third row, close enough to observe the interactions among the orchestra members, but not so near as to intrude upon their grief and professional duties. Poirot's gaze was particularly fixed on Richard Bennett, who stood conferring with Charles Whitcomb at the edge of the stage. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "Already he adopts the posture of authority. Note how the musicians glance toward him, some with curiosity, others with assessment. A new hierarchy establishes itself with remarkable speed." "Necessity," I replied. "They perform again tomorrow evening, don't they?" "Indeed, the show must continue, as they say, but in this continuity may lie revelation." Our attention was drawn to the entrance of Lady Margaret Harrington, who swept down the center aisle with the purposeful stride of someone who considered the space partially her own. She nodded curtly to us before approaching Bennett and Whitcomb. Though we could not hear their conversation, her animated gestures suggested strong opinions were being expressed. "The patroness asserts her influence," Poirot observed. "Most interesting." As Lady Harrington turned to leave, Poirot rose smoothly to intercept her. "Lady Harrington, a moment of your time, if I might impose." Her expression suggested imposition was precisely what she considered it, but good breeding prevailed. "Briefly, Monsieur Poirot, I have a luncheon engagement." "Of course, I merely wish to inquire about the antique baton you presented to Maestro Vincelli. Might I see it? It could be relevant to our investigation." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or concern, crossed her aristocratic features. "I'm afraid that's impossible. The baton is no longer in my possession, and Vincelli never displayed it in his office or apartment." "Most curious," Poirot replied. "A valuable historical artifact, yet it seems to have vanished. Do you recall precisely when you presented it to him?" "Last Tuesday evening, after the Brahms concert." Her gloved hand toyed with her pearl necklace. Antonio was less appreciative than I had hoped. He called it an interesting museum piece, but unsuitable for serious conducting. "And this was before or after your disagreement regarding the orchestra's repertoire?" Her lips thinned. "After. Though I hardly see how that matters. In murder investigations, Lady Harrington, timing often illuminates motive," Poirot said gently. "I understand Maestro Vincelli could be ruthlessly dismissive of those who contradicted his artistic vision." "Antonio was an artist of uncompromising standards," she replied stiffly. "If lesser minds found him difficult, that was their limitation, not his. Yet his dismissal of your gift must have been wounding, particularly following a public disagreement." A flash of genuine emotion broke through her composed exterior. "Do you imagine I would commit murder over wounded pride, Monsieur Poirot? I valued Antonio's genius, even when I found his manner insufferable. Without his talent, what meaning would my patronage have?" After Lady Harrington departed, the rehearsal began in earnest. Bennett conducted with precise, contained gestures, a stark contrast to Vincelli's flamboyant style. The orchestra responded tentatively at first, but gradually found its rhythm under the new leadership. "What do you make of Bennett?" Jap asked quietly. "A competent technician," Poirot replied, his eyes never leaving the stage, though perhaps lacking the spark of true inspiration. But observe how carefully he treads, neither mimicking Vincelli nor imposing too dramatically different an interpretation. A man who understands the politics of succession. As the rehearsal progressed, I noticed Helena Rossi watching Bennett with an inscrutable expression. When they paused between movements, she leaned forward to make a suggestion that Bennett appeared to welcome, nodding with what seemed genuine appreciation. "The dynamic shift," Poirot murmured. Madame Rossi would never have offered such input to Vincelli. After the rehearsal concluded, we encountered Dr. Mercer in the corridor leading backstage. He carried his medical bag and explained he was checking on several musicians who had been particularly distressed by Vincelli's death. "A considerate gesture," Poirot remarked. "You take your duties as orchestra physician most seriously." "These musicians are under my care," Mercer replied. "Psychological well-being affects physical performance." Vincelli understood that, even if he chose to ignore it in his pursuit of perfection. "Did you ever counsel him about his methods?" A shadow crossed Mercer's face. "Once. He informed me that coddling mediocrity was not in his job description, nor in mine." He hesitated, then added, "My brother was a violinist, you know. Quite talented. He encountered Vincelli in Vienna some years ago." "Sophia Vincelli mentioned an incident in Vienna," I said. "A young musician who challenged the maestro?" Mercer's expression hardened. "My brother made the mistake of questioning Vincelli's tempo during a master class. Vincelli destroyed him publicly, called his understanding primitive, his technique amateurish. Within a year, my brother could not secure auditions with any significant orchestra." "A harsh consequence for a professional disagreement," Poirot observed. "Vincelli didn't engage in disagreements, Monsieur Poirot. He delivered judgments." Mercer's knuckles whitened around the handle of his bag. "My brother took his own life 3 years ago. Vincelli, when informed, reportedly said, 'It was regrettable, but inevitable, when talent fails to recognize its limitations.'" After Mercer continued on his way, Poirot stood silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Another connection to Vienna," he mused. "The circles tighten Hastings." We made our way backstage. We encountered a small, efficient woman with iron-gray hair, arranging costumes in a wardrobe room. She introduced herself as Mrs. Abernathy, the wardrobe mistress. "Did you happen to see anyone enter Maestro Vincelli's private room before the performance yesterday?" Poirot inquired. Mrs. Abernathy continued her work as she considered the question. "Several people, I should think. Mr. Bennett, naturally. Madame Rossi consulted him about a passage in the score. And there was someone else. Just a glimpse as I passed. I couldn't say who with certainty." "But you saw someone?" Jap pressed. "A figure in the doorway," she confirmed. "I assumed it was authorized. Everyone is so careful around the maestro's private space." She paused, realizing her slip into present tense, and corrected herself. "Were careful, I should say." As we left the wardrobe area, Poirot's pace slowed, his brow furrowed in that particular way that told me his little grey cells were arranging and rearranging the facts. "Vienna," he murmured, "a missing baton, a gifted baton, a doctored baton, the timing of a musical passage." His eyes brightened suddenly. "Hastings, we must speak with George Harrison immediately." "The stage manager?" I asked, surprised. "But he's hardly figured in our inquiries thus far." "Precisely why his insights may prove illuminating," Poirot replied cryptically. "For in this performance, my friend, I believe there were more than musical cues being followed. There was a schedule of death precisely timed to the beat of Beethoven himself." Chapter 6. Medical Matters. George Harrison, the stage manager, proved surprisingly difficult to locate. When we finally discovered him examining lighting equipment in the upper gallery, his manner was distracted and somewhat defensive. "I've already spoken with the constables," he informed us, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles with ink-stained fingers. I'm afraid I saw nothing unusual before the performance. Maestro Vincelli was particular about his pre-concert routine. No interruptions, no deviations. It is precisely this routine that interests me, Poirot replied. The exact sequence of events from Vincelli's arrival until his collapse. You, as stage manager, would observe these with professional attention, no? Harrison hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. True enough, it's my job to coordinate everything down to the second. Then perhaps you might describe the final minutes before Maestro Vincelli took the stage. Harrison closed his eyes briefly as though consulting an internal schedule. Vincelli arrived precisely 1 hour before performance. As always, he spent 40 minutes alone in his room. Preparation time, he called it. At 20 minutes before curtain, Bennett would deliver the evening's score for final review. At 10 minutes, Bennett would return to escort him to the wings. At 3 minutes, the orchestra would be ready. At 2 minutes, house lights would dim. At 1 minute, Bennett would present the baton. Then, on my signal, Vincelli would walk onto the stage. And these timings were consistent, never varied? Poirot inquired. Never. Vincelli considered precise timing an extension of musical discipline. Any deviation would result in... Harrison winced. Well, unpleasantness. And on the night in question was this sequence observed exactly? Harrison frowned, considering. Yes, though. He paused. Though, Poirot prompted. The presentation of the baton seemed slightly different. Usually Bennett would present it ceremonially, holding it across both palms. That night he handed it over more directly. I thought nothing of it at the time. After leaving Harrison, we made our way to the small laboratory room where Scotland Yard's forensic experts had set up temporary headquarters. The baton that had delivered the fatal poison lay on an examination table, now partially disassembled, to reveal its deadly mechanism. Ingenious and diabolical, remarked the forensic specialist, a thin man with perpetually surprised eyebrows. The hollow chamber within the handle contained a spring-loaded needle coated with the toxin. When sufficient pressure was applied to this specific point of the grip, as would naturally occur during an emphatic conducting gesture, the needle would deploy momentarily into the palm, then retract. The victim would feel nothing more than a slight prick, Jap asked. Precisely, in the excitement of conducting, it might register as nothing more than a splinter, or minor irritation. But the toxin would enter the bloodstream immediately. And the nature of this toxin? Poirot inquired. A synthetic neurotoxin derived from compounds found in certain reptile venoms, but chemically modified to increase potency, extremely fast acting. Death would occur within 60 to 90 seconds of administration. Would the preparation of such a substance require specialized knowledge? I asked. Indeed, the specialist confirmed, advanced training in organic chemistry at minimum, and access to laboratory equipment. Such as one might find in a chemical engineering facility, Poirot suggested. Precisely that. As we departed, Jap's expression was grim. This doesn't look good for Sophia Vincelli. The technical expertise, the access to chemicals, the motive of financial grievance and family estrangement. Do not rush to conclusions, my friend, Poirot cautioned. The evidence suggests someone with a particular combination of skills, musical knowledge, technical ability, chemical expertise, and intimate familiarity with Vincelli's habits. We must consider who possesses the complete set. Our next interview was with Dr. Mercer in his small medical office adjacent to the orchestra's rehearsal rooms. The space was clinically organized with medical texts lining one wall and a glass cabinet containing various pharmaceuticals along another. The autopsy results confirm what I suspected, Mercer informed us, studying the report Jap had brought. A fast-acting neurotoxin that would have caused almost immediate cardiorespiratory failure. Vincelli would have experienced perhaps a moment of awareness before collapse. You recognize the symptoms immediately, Poirot observed. I've had occasion to study various toxins, Mercer replied. Part of my medical training included toxicology. And your front row seat would have given you a perfect view of precisely when Vincelli might grip the doctored baton with sufficient force, I noted. Mercer's expression cooled. Are you suggesting I orchestrated this murder, Captain Hastings? That I somehow sabotaged his baton, then sat in the audience to watch my handiwork unfold? We are exploring all possibilities, Japp stated bluntly. Then explore this, Mercer replied, his composure cracking slightly. I was sitting beside Lady Harrington. At no point did I leave my seat before Vincelli's collapse. And while I detested the man for what he did to my brother, I'm a physician. I took an oath to preserve life, not to end it. Your brother's situation in Vienna, Poirot said gently. It was not uncommon, I believe. Maestro Vincelli had a history of destroying careers. Mercer's laugh was hollow. Destroying careers? He destroyed lives, Monsieur Poirot. My brother was merely one among many. There was another, a promising conductor named Bennett, not our Richard Bennett, but his older brother, Thomas. Bennett had a brother? I asked, startled. Yes. Thomas Bennett challenged Vincelli's interpretation during a masterclass in Vienna 5 years ago. Vincelli used his considerable influence to ensure Thomas never conducted a major orchestra again. Richard never speaks of him, but I know the history. In musical circles, these stories travel. After leaving Mercer's office, Poirot was uncharacteristically silent as we walked through the corridor. His brow was furrowed in that particular way that indicated intense mental activity. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts at such moments when the little grey cells were arranging and rearranging the facts into a coherent pattern. We made our way through the grand building, passing musicians who spoke in hushed tones about the evening's memorial concert. Poirot paused briefly to observe a notice board where a copy of the previous night's program was displayed, his eyes lingering on the listing of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The pattern was indeed emerging: Vienna, the destroyed careers, the suicides, and now a brother's potential revenge. All the elements required for this murder were coming into alignment. The musical knowledge to predict the exact moment when Vincelli would grip the baton with maximum force, the access to create or switch the batons, the technical skill to design the mechanism, and a motive far deeper than mere professional advancement. As we approached the archive room where the orchestral scores were kept, Poirot's expression changed to one of quiet determination. Within those musical notations might lie the final confirmation of our murderer's identity, the precise moment in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony when death had been scheduled to the beat of a musical masterpiece. In the convergence of art and vengeance, Poirot sought the truth, and I could see in his eyes that he believed we were drawing ever closer to it. Chapter 7. The Second Baton. The next morning dawned grey and misty, a fitting backdrop to our sombre investigation. Poirot had arranged for us to return to Vincelli's apartment before the memorial concert scheduled for that evening. This time we were accompanied by Miss Lemmel, Poirot's secretary, whose efficiency in matters of research was unparalleled. I have compiled the information you requested, Mr. Poirot, she announced as our taxi pulled up to the Mayfair address. From her impeccably organized attaché case, she produced a folder containing newspaper clippings and printouts, all references to Maestro Vincelli's performances in Vienna over the past 7 years, with particular attention to any controversies or incidents. Excellent, Miss Lemon. Your thoroughness, as always, is beyond reproach. The building manager admitted us once again to Vincelli's apartment. In the clear morning light, the austere elegance of the space seemed even more pronounced, a life dedicated to art at the expense of human connection. While Japp began a more thorough search of the study, Poirot and I examined the main living area. Miss Lemon arranged her materials on the piano, which served as the only suitable surface for paperwork. The empty Baton case continues to intrigue me, Poirot murmured, examining the velvet-lined container once more. If the Baton used in the murder was a replica, specially crafted to contain the deadly mechanism, then where is the original? Perhaps disposed of by the killer, I suggested. Possibly, but why? The original Baton would not carry evidence of wrongdoing. Poirot's fingers traced the contours of the empty case thoughtfully. No, Hastings, I believe there is more significance to this missing instrument. Japp emerged from the study holding a small, leather-bound book. Appears to be some sort of journal, he said. Mostly musical notations and critiques of performances, but there are some personal entries as well. Poirot took the journal with interest, leafing through the pages filled with Vincelli's sharp, angular handwriting. He paused at an entry dated 5 years earlier. Vienna, March 1920, he read aloud. Another tedious master class with mediocre talents. One particularly presumptuous young man, T.B., had the audacity to question my interpretation of the third movement. I have ensured he will not find engagement with any orchestra of significance. Such arrogance must be excised from the profession. T.B., I murmured. Thomas Bennett. Indeed, Poirot confirmed, and observed the date, precisely when Dr. Mercer indicated the incident occurred. As Poirot continued to examine the journal, Miss Lemon approached with a newspaper clipping. You may find this relevant, Mr. Poirot. From the Vienna Musical Chronicle, dated June 1922. It reports the suicide of Thomas Bennett, describing him as a once promising conductor whose career had stalled following a controversial dispute with the renowned maestro Vincelli. Poirot nodded gravely. The pattern solidifies, and what of communications to Vincelli regarding this matter? There is this, Miss Lemon replied, producing a letter written on heavy stationery. It arrived 3 months ago, according to the postmark. The letter was brief, written in a precise hand. Maestro Vincelli. The debt of Vienna remains unpaid. Music demands justice, as you have so often proclaimed. What you have taken cannot be restored, but balance will be achieved. The signature, Poirot observed, is not a name but a musical notation, a single 8th note. Could be anyone, Japp remarked. Not much to go on. On the contrary, Poirot replied, it tells us a great deal. The writer is someone who thinks in musical terms, someone who feels Vincelli owes a debt related to Vienna, someone who speaks of justice and balance. His expression grew thoughtful. And someone who knew Vincelli would understand precisely what this referred to. Our search of the apartment continued methodically. In Vincelli's bedroom, as Spartan as the rest of the flat, we discovered a locked drawer in the bedside table. Japp, with the building manager's permission, forced it open to reveal a small collection of personal items. A faded photograph of a much younger Vincelli, with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Sophia. A few letters tied with ribbon, and, most significantly, a newspaper clipping about the appointment of Richard Bennett as associate conductor of the London Symphony. Curious that he would keep this, I observed. Perhaps he saw in Richard Bennett what he had destroyed in Thomas, Poirot suggested. A form of atonement, or perhaps merely professional interest. As we prepared to leave, a telephone call from the forensic laboratory brought news. The analysis of the fatal baton had revealed fingerprints, most belonging to Vincelli himself, but with clear impressions from Richard Bennett as well. To be expected, Japp noted. Bennett presented the baton to him. Yes, Poirot agreed. But the question remains, when was the substitution made? For there must have been 2 batons, the genuine one from Vincelli's collection, and the deadly replica. Our investigation led us next to Lady Harrington's Belgravia residence, where Poirot hoped to learn more about the antique baton she had gifted to Vincelli. We were admitted to an elegantly appointed drawing room where musical memorabilia adorned the walls, signed photographs of famous composers and conductors, including a prominently displayed portrait of Vincelli. Lady Harrington received us with cool politeness. "I've already told you all I know about the Baton, Monsieur Poirot. It was an antique piece, once owned by Gustave Mahler. I purchased it at auction specifically for Antonio." "And when you presented it to him?" Poirot inquired. "He was less than enthusiastic. He examined it briefly, thanked me with obvious reluctance, and placed it in his coat pocket. I never saw it again." "Did he mention what he intended to do with it?" "He said something about his collection," she replied. "I assumed he meant to display it at his apartment or office. But you did not see it in either location?" Perhaps he disposed of it. Antonio could be—" She hesitated, ungracious when displeased. As we took our leave, Poirot paused to examine a photograph on a side table. Lady Harrington, with the orchestra at a gala event. In the image, Vincelli stood at a distance from her, while Richard Bennet was positioned nearby, smiling politely for the camera. "Lady Harrington," Poirot inquired, "your impression of Mr. Bennet?" Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Richard? He's charming, competent, always appropriate, unlike Antonio, who could be so unnecessarily harsh. Richard understands the social aspects of musical leadership that Antonio disdained." Back in the taxi, Poirot sat in thoughtful silence, his fingers pressed together in his characteristic pose of contemplation. The pieces were coming together: Vienna, the Bennet brothers, the missing batons, the precise timing required for the murder. "We must examine the score, Hastings," he finally said. "The exact score used in that fatal performance. For I believe our murderer left his signature not only in the method but in the precise moment chosen for Vincelli's death. The music itself will tell us when the fatal gesture was predetermined to occur. The memorial concert was scheduled for 8 o'clock. Before then we had an appointment with the orchestral librarian to examine Vincelli's annotated score of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the music that had accompanied a conductor to his meticulously planned death." Chapter 8. The Rehearsal Revelation. The orchestral library at Royal Albert Hall occupied a small, climate-controlled room lined with shelves of bound scores in individual parts. Here, amid the musty aroma of paper and binding glue, we met Miss Evelyn Porter, the orchestral librarian, a slender woman with wire-rimmed spectacles and the careful hands of someone accustomed to handling precious documents. "Maestro Vincelli's personal score," she said, placing a large bound volume on the table before us. "He was most particular about his annotations. No one else was permitted to mark the score, not even Mr. Bennet." Poirot examined the cover. "And this is the exact score used during the final performance?" "Yes, sir. I retrieved it from the podium myself after—" she faltered. "After the incident." "Most helpful," Poirot murmured, carefully opening the volume. "Would you say these markings are characteristic of Maestro Vincelli's usual annotations?" Miss Porter adjusted her spectacles and peered at the pages. "Oh yes. See these dynamic markings in red, and these tempo adjustments in blue. Quite his standard practice." Poirot turned the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the musical notations with surprising familiarity for one who, to my knowledge, had limited musical training. He paused at the third movement, where Vincelli had made particularly extensive markings. "Most interesting," he said. "These annotations in the third movement, they indicate a significant change in tempo and dynamics, do they not?" "Indeed," Miss Porter confirmed. The maestro was known for his dramatic interpretation of the third movement. He would build to an unusually powerful climax at this passage. She pointed to a section heavily annotated in various colors. And this moment would require a particularly emphatic conducting gesture, Poirot inquired. Oh yes, Maestro Vincelli would practically leap at this point, bringing the baton down with tremendous force to drive the crescendo. Her expression softened with memory. It was his signature moment. Audiences always responded with particular enthusiasm. One final question, if I may. Did anyone examine this score shortly before the performance, perhaps to review the maestro's interpretation? Miss Porter's brow furrowed in concentration. Mr. Bennet collected it for final review, as is customary. But there was someone else. She hesitated. I believe I saw Madame Rossi consulting it briefly that afternoon. She mentioned a question about a violin passage. After thanking the librarian, we returned to the main hall where preparations for the evening's memorial concert were underway. The stage had been draped in black, a large photograph of Vincelli positioned where he would have stood. Richard Bennet was conferring with Charles Whitcomb near the piano, both men engrossed in what appeared to be a program change. Shall we confront Bennet now? Japp asked quietly. Not yet, Poirot cautioned. I require one final confirmation. Ah, and here comes the very person who might provide it. Elena Rossi approached, music folder tucked under her arm. She acknowledged us with a slight nod. Madame Rossi, Poirot began, might I impose upon your musical expertise? The passage in the third movement of Beethoven's Fifth, the one Maestro Vincelli interpreted with such distinctive emphasis, could you identify the precise moment in the score? If she found the request odd, she gave no indication. Taking the score Poirot offered, she turned immediately to the relevant page. Here, she said, pointing to a measure marked with Vincelli's bold red annotations. This fortissimo passage is where he would make his most dramatic gesture. He insisted it represented fate's most powerful statement in the entire symphony. And at this exact moment, his grip on the baton would be at its most forceful. Undoubtedly, he would grip as though his life depended on it. Her expression faltered as she realized the unfortunate irony of her words. Thank you, Madame. Most illuminating. After Madame Rossi departed, Poirot carefully marked the page in question. The moment of death was not random, Hastings. It was precisely calculated to coincide with this dramatic passage, a moment when Vincelli would inevitably grip the baton with maximum force, triggering the hidden mechanism. Only a musician would know that, I observed. Precisely. And not merely any musician, but one intimately familiar with Vincelli's interpretation of this specific work. We made our way backstage, where Mrs. Abernathy was arranging mourning bands for the orchestra members to wear during the evening's performance. Upon seeing Poirot, she approached with an air of hesitant concern. Monsieur Poirot, I've been thinking about what you asked about seeing someone in Maestro Vincelli's room before the performance. I wasn't certain then, but I've had time to reflect. Yes, madame. It was Mr. Bennet I saw, but there was something odd about his manner. Normally he's so proper around the maestro's things, but this time he seemed to be examining something very closely. When he noticed me passing, he quickly pocketed whatever it was. Most interesting, and this was when precisely, perhaps 40 minutes before the performance, during the maestro's preparation time when he should have been alone. Thank you, madame. Your observation may prove most significant. As Mrs. Abernathy returned to her duties, Poirot led us to a quiet corner where we could speak without being overheard. His expression had taken on that particular intensity that signaled his little grey cells had arranged the final pieces of the puzzle. "We must search Bennett's belongings," he said quietly. "I believe we will find either the original baton from Vincelli's collection or the antique presented by Lady Harrington. Perhaps both." "On what grounds?" Japp asked. "I need more than musical notations to obtain such authorization." "Then perhaps this will suffice," Poirot replied, removing from his pocket the threatening letter Miss Lemon had discovered. "Observe the signature, a single eighth note. Now compare it to these." From his other pocket, he produced a notated score sheet. "These are Bennett's own annotations on a piece he conducted last month. Observe how he marks certain passages with the same distinctive eighth note symbol." Japp examined both documents carefully. "Similar certainly, but would that stand up in court? Combined with opportunity, motive, technical ability, and this?" Poirot indicated the marked passage in Beethoven's Fifth. "I believe we have sufficient cause to proceed." With Japp's authorization, a discreet search of Bennett's office and dressing room was conducted while he rehearsed with the orchestra. In a locked drawer of his desk, wrapped in velvet, lay 2 batons, one matching the description of the antique Mahler baton, the other clearly from Vincelli's personal collection. As the rehearsal concluded and Bennett stepped from the podium, he found Poirot, Japp, and myself waiting in the wings. His expression betrayed only mild curiosity until Japp produced the 2 batons. The blood drained from Bennett's face, his composure fracturing for the first time since we had met him. In that moment, looking at his stricken expression, I knew that Poirot had solved the mystery of the conductor's baton. The orchestra members filed past, some casting curious glances at the tableau we formed. The memorial concert would proceed in a few hours, but it would be led by another conductor. For Richard Bennett, the music had finally stopped. The memorial concert proceeded with a subdued dignity, conducted by a hastily summoned maestro from another orchestra. The audience, unaware of the drama that had unfolded backstage, mourned the genius of Vincelli, while the musicians performed with a curious mixture of grief and relief. Richard Bennett offered no resistance when Japp formally arrested him. He maintained a composer's silence throughout the process, his face a mask of resigned dignity. Only when the batons were carefully packaged as evidence did he speak, his voice barely audible. "He killed my brother twice," he said. "First his career, then his spirit. Thomas was the true genius." Later that evening, settled in Poirot's comfortable flat, we reflected on the case over glasses of hot chocolate. Miss Lemon had compiled a neat dossier of all the evidence for Japp's formal report. It was a murder composed with the precision of a symphony. Poirot mused, his eyes half closed as he savored his chocolate. Each element in its place, each development timed to the measure. Bennett used his position to access Vincelli's private room, his technical expertise to create the deadly mechanism, and his musical knowledge to determine the exact moment when Vincelli would grip the baton with sufficient force. But why keep the original batons? I wondered. Surely that was an unnecessary risk. But there you touch on the psychology of the crime, mon ami. Bennett did not see himself merely as a murderer, but as an instrument of justice. The batons were his trophies, proof that he had restored balance to the musical world that had destroyed his brother. Lady Harrington's antique baton provided the perfect opportunity, I realized. He could examine its construction without suspicion. Precisely. And then create a replica incorporating his deadly mechanism. Poirot sighed gently. A tragedy of talent and revenge. Bennett's brilliance might have earned him the conductor's podium legitimately in time, but he could not wait for the music of justice to play out naturally. Miss Lemon closed her notebook with characteristic efficiency. "Will you be attending the trial, Mr. Poirot?" "I think not, Miss Lemon. The evidence speaks clearly enough without my presence. Some final notes are better left unheard. He placed his empty cup on the side table. In this case, the music revealed the murderer. For as Bennett knew well and fatally forgot, every conductor must eventually answer to the score. The case of the conductor's baton was closed, the deadly symphony concluded, but in the quiet of Poirot's flat, I could almost hear the haunting echoes of Beethoven's Fifth, the sound of fate knocking at the door, and of justice finally answered. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.